Okay. Good morning, everyone. We are starting. The session is beginning. I think that the connection is good for everyone. I see that there are 15 attendees registered. We have 5 panelists. We are in the room of ACR Plus in Brussels. So we are kindly hosted by ACR Plus at its headquarters. And we have also some on-site participants here in the room. So thank you for joining. It's a kind of an experiment here, having both on-site and online attendance. Using Zoom, it's quite interactive, so you will have the possibility also to ask questions. If you see below, you have a question and answer section. And at any time, you can ask questions to both panelists and other attendees. So let's start with the introduction, and I will give the word to Ainhoa Alonso, remotely from Bilbao. Hello, Ainhoa.
Hello. Hello. Good afternoon.
Okay, so I stopped sharing, so you can start sharing the screen and give us a presentation and introduction about the Waste for Things project. Thank you, Ainhoa.
Thank you. Can you see the presentation?
Yeah, very good.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, good afternoon. Thank you very much, Michele, for the presentation. I'm sorry for not being there with you today, but it has not been possible for me to go to Brussels today. Just to start, some figures to understand the importance of Waste for Things and its context. Near 2,050 tons of waste is generated every year by households, which is about 9% of the total waste generated in Europe. From this, 26% is sent to landfill, 27% is incinerated, and only 47% is composted or recycled. While looking at the current best practices, it would be possible to reach until the 80% of recycling. This means that near 80 million tons of recyclable materials are wasted annually. And from this, bio-waste, and especially food waste, is a very sensitive fraction that it is collected in few members countries in Europe. And the studies say that it could be possible to reach until or near the 75% of food waste could even be avoidable. This means that waste management costs billions of euros to our public authorities, and it supposes over the 3% of the total greenhouse gas emissions in Europe. So the main challenge in waste management is to improve the systems, not only in economic terms, but also considering the environmental and the social impacts. But the main barriers that our local authorities have to face too are the lack of reliable information for the decision-making process, but also the lack of tools to put into communication the different actors involved in the value chain. Then, Waste for Things aims to move forward the current waste management system practices into a circular economy motto by the integration and demonstration of 20 eco-innovative solutions that cover all the waste value chain. In particular, our objectives are to reduce the generation in origin, promoting long-term behavioral changes in generators, to foster fiscal instruments as well as awareness and educational campaigns to incentivize good behaviors, to improve the waste management services from economical and environmental and social perspectives, to enforce transparency and empowerment of citizenship, to foster bottom-up initiatives, and finally to propose two eco-innovative valorization alternatives for waste and nappies treatment and valorization. These eco-solutions will be assessed in 4 municipalities in Europe, which will allow us to assess their transferability to the market at the end of the project. These eco-solutions are both technological and not technological solutions that can be grouped in 6 families. ICT tools to support the daily operation and the long-term planning for managers. Apps to foster citizen involvement and engagement. Tools for citizen science for the co-creation of novel solutions. Economic instruments and social actions to boost long-term behavioral changes. Educational materials based on innovative digital teaching units and serious games. And finally, 2 decentralized solutions for the valorization and reuse of bio-waste and nappies to produce bio-waste and compost. These solutions will be tested in 4 urban areas in Europe. In Alandri, that is a very business municipality in Greece. At the beginning of the project, they only separated 2 fractions, recyclables and rest, and most waste was sent to landfill. So they wanted to revert this situation by the collection of a new fraction, bio-waste, for its valorization to produce biogas and compost. Cascais, that it is a very touristic area in Portugal with a very advanced waste collection system based on underground containers. And they look to improve their sorting rate from 13% to 30% through the implementation of a collective pay-as-you-throw system, and by the optimization of the waste collection, introducing real-time aspects such as the level of filling of the containers using sensors. Zamudio in Spain is a very industrial area with the highest technological part of the province. Their starting point and their objectives are quite similar to Cascais. They want to increase the sorting rate till 30%, introducing an individual pay-as-you-throw system based on smart containers with electronic locks for user identification, as we will see later. And finally, Seveso, with a very well-established collection system based on door-to-door system, and with a high level of sorting rate of 70% at the beginning of the project. So the ambitious was to achieve the theoretical maximum value of 80%, introducing a pay-as-you-throw system based on tax impacts, and as we will see later on too. So at the end, we expect to have an important impact in terms of waste generation, waste sorting, a saving of management costs, and also reduction of the greenhouse gas emissions, by changing the behavior of citizens to promote or to move towards more sustainable cities in Europe. So, summarizing, we can say that Waste for Things is an international project involving 19 partners from 6 European countries. It's also an intersectorial project involving companies and institutions from different sectors, such as education, waste management and technology, economy and policy. It's a very innovative project that integrates 20 innovative solutions on the 5 work components that can be applicable as an integral solution or with different combinations of several of them, depending on the characteristics and starting point of each municipality. Interdisciplinarity is also present in this integral solution with a combination of social and educational actions with ICT solutions and economic measures to achieve the objectives in the waste management sector. We are in the last phase of the project, and we can say that Waste for Things is also a very high impact project with the first national pay-as-you-throw system in Spain based on containers, with the consolidation of the PAYT in Seveso, reaching, as we will see, an 80% of the sorting rate, with the introduction of a new concept of collective PAYT in Cascais to incentivize collectively citizens to improve their sorting rate. Also with the consolidation of 2 new collection fractions in a laundry, reaching the 75% of the sorting rate, introducing a new product based on bio-waste that we call 4B, and a new treatment plant for the valorization of nappies to produce biogas and polymers, plastic polymers. This biogas, in fact, is also used to run the different collection lorries in the municipality to collect the bio-waste. We are also in the process of the standardization of the data model around waste management that we will allow to assess the impact of the different waste management systems in Europe. And we are also promoting different actions and activities around food, cooked food donation, especially zero waste events, zero waste ecosystems, sustainable local trade, and public green procurement. Finally, we can say that Waste for Things is a project created for, with, and by people, as we are promoting also different citizen science activities for the empowerment and co-creation of solutions, such as mapping sessions with citizens to assess the accessibility of the services, for example, of the municipality, while citizens learn about waste management and also ICT technologies like geographical and information systems. We promote also open participatory processes. For example, the open process for the definition of the taxes in Zamudio. We also pay special attention in gender dimension to assess the impact of this variable on the waste management systems, and also to foster the involvement of women in the political life of the Waste for Things pilots. Until this moment, we can say that Waste for Things has created near 50 new jobs. So, in short, we can say that Waste for Things is creating new business and governance models that are making our pilots more efficient, sustainable, and inclusive cities in Europe. All these results achieved till now, as well as the access to the different tools developed in the project, are available in our website and also in the story maps of the project available in this link. And from my side, nothing more. Just to thank you for this event and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ainhoa. If somebody wants to do some question to Ainhoa, the people who are here, or also people online, you have to just raise your hand, make some question. You will find the option in the bottom of your screen. So, yes. Okay, so I will give the floor to Malgorzata Golewiecka. I'm sorry if I don't pronounce properly, from the European Commission. She works in the secondary materials unit of the DG Environment. It's your turn.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction and thank you for the invitation. I'm here today to give you a short overview of the European legislative framework and how the economic instruments such as pay-as-you-throw fit into that framework. Yes. How do I change the slides?
The screen. The screen. Just a moment, sorry.
Maybe I can already talk in the meantime. Maybe I can already present in the meantime while we're solving the technical problem with the screen. So basically, as many of you may already know, the Waste Framework Directive, which is the main directive in the area of waste management that encompasses the main principles and obligations, and with which other waste framework directives have to be compatible. Waste directives have to be compatible. Has recently been reviewed following a proposal from the Commission, which was made in 2015 in the framework of the circular economy package. A set of reviews were proposed, and the proposals included changes to the Waste Framework Directive, important changes, the Landfill Directive, Packaging and Packaging Waste Directive, and then in addition, 3 other directives were slightly amended just for the reporting obligations. This was an important change in the legal framework, European legal framework, mainly because new and more ambitious targets for waste management in the EU were introduced, including, first of all, more ambitious recycling targets for municipal waste. The current target existing in the current legislation is 50% to be achieved by 2020, while the revised Waste Framework Directive included new targets starting from 2025 with 55%, 2030 60%, and then 65% to be achieved by 2035. Yes, in addition, here we are, I think. In addition, the Landfill Directive was amended to include a maximum cap on municipal waste to be at 10% by 2035. So these important changes set a forward-looking framework for the member states as to what we want to achieve, how we want to implement the waste hierarchy. I think we have the slides.
we don't put it full screen because it creates problems.
Ah, okay.
You just click on the right.
With the wheel, with the wheel.
With the wheel.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, with the wheel.
So, I mean, maybe just briefly, I've already mentioned. So here's the legislative framework for EU waste legislation, where Waste Framework Directive is, let's say, on top of that hierarchy, and then accompanied by waste shipment regulation. Then we have specific directives dealing with waste treatment, and subsequently waste stream specific legislation, which includes directives such as packaging and packaging waste directive, or batteries and accumulators, etc. So this again repeats the timeline of the review. So that review directive was adopted in 2018, last year, and member states since then have 2 years to transpose that directive into national law. So the date of the transposition is 5th July 2020. So these are the targets that I've already before we saw the slides. The municipal waste recycling targets, which you can see on the right-hand side, with 2020 being the existing target and the red column being the level where the EU as a whole was at in 2015, and then where we want to get by 2035. And then on the left-hand side, you see the municipal waste landfill target with a 2035 target of maximum 10% landfilling. In addition, the revised packaging and packaging waste directive introduced also more ambitious recycling targets for packaging, with an overall target for packaging of 70% recycling to be achieved by 2030, with an intermediate 2025 target of 65%. And then there are material-specific targets included. So just to give an example, for plastic, the current target is at 22.5%, and that is supposed to increase to 50% by 2025 and 55% by 2030. The most ambitious target is for paper to reach 85% by 2035. So this is all a very ambitious legislative framework with forward-looking targets, setting the investment agenda for years to come for all the member states that have to now organize the waste management system in a way that they can achieve this target and also put the necessary infrastructure in place. So how can the member states achieve these targets? Well, the Waste Framework Directive foresees several instruments to support member states with that effort, starting with separate collection. The obligation of separate collection has been in the Waste Framework Directive already, with a 2015 obligation for at least paper, metal, plastic, and glass. However, the latest revision of the Waste Framework Directive strengthens the obligation of separate collection by more clearly defining where member states can derogate from the obligation. There are 4 such cases, and member states also have to justify these derogations that indeed these criteria are met. The member states also have to ensure not only that the 4 waste materials are separately collected, but that obligation is extended also to cover biodegradable waste, which should be collected separately from the beginning of 2024, hazardous household waste, and also textiles, both streams to be collected from 2025 on. In addition, member states are obliged to ensure sorting systems for construction and demolition waste, so-called it's a selective demolition. And then finally, there are specific requirements that have to be included in the waste management plans, where member states are supposed to analyze their separate collection schemes that are in place and what needs to be improved and changed to really deliver on the targets. Coming now to the topic of the seminar today, the economic instruments are an important part of the measures and tools that are provided by the Waste Framework Directive. I mean, up until now, the directive included the polluter pays principle, which of course already clarified that the costs of waste management should be borne by the waste producers or by the current previous waste holders. However, now the principle. It also includes an obligation mentioned in Article 4 and point 3. Why is there such a focus on the economic instruments in the legal framework now? It's clearly because the experience has shown that member states that have member states or regions that have progressed in their waste management and recycling in the course of the past decades have usually set the right economic framework to promote recycling, prevention and recycling to the detriment of disposal and also incineration. So it's clear that if the economic operators have all the incentives to treat their waste in line with the waste hierarchy, that is an important push to make it happen. This Article 4 refers to Annex 4A, which is a new annex that was added to the revised Waste Framework Directive, which includes an indicative list of such instruments. Member states, of course, in line with the subsidiarity principle, can choose which instruments they put in place in order to deliver on the targets, but the directive now specifically lists different instruments that they should take into consideration, including in their waste management plans. And these instruments are listed on the slides. They're well-known instruments such as landfill and incineration, taxes, pay-as-you-throw scheme, other fiscal measures, fiscal incentives, for example, to use secondary raw materials, extended producer responsibility. That instrument has already been listed in the Waste Framework Directive in the past. Now the Waste Framework Directive is much clearer about what the EPR means, what it is, and sets new general minimum requirements for EPR in another article, aiming at harmonization of the way schemes are organized across the EU. I mean, greater harmonization, not full, but greater, let's put it this way. The Annex 4 also mentions instruments such as deposit refund systems, refers to public procurement that has an important role to play to stimulate the market, calls for phase out of harmful subsidies, support to research and innovation, and also specific incentive schemes for regional and local authorities to also meet their recycling targets. There are also other instruments listed in Annex 4A which would not necessarily fall under the economic instrument definition, but are nevertheless very important, such as use of best available techniques for waste treatment, public awareness campaigns, coordination, greater coordination between public authorities delivering waste management services, and also dialogue between the stakeholders, including economic operators. And that specifically, of course, refers to the extended producer responsibility as well. And then the waste management plans are also supposed to analyze the need for the economic instruments and their use, specifically at least every 6 years when these plans are updated. When it comes to the pay-as-you-throw tool, the Waste Framework Directive specifically defines what it is in Annex 4A and makes it clear that it's the scheme that charges waste producers on the basis of the actual waste amounts that are generated by them. And it's supposed to provide incentives for separation at source of recyclable waste and for reducing mixed waste, clearly by charging more for such type of waste. The member states, the Waste Framework Directive overall supports the use of these instruments in different places of the Waste Framework Directive. So I already mentioned specifically Annex 4A. However, member states and the obligation for the member states to use these economic instruments to support application of waste hierarchy. However, it's also important to mention that in Article 8A, which concerns extended producer responsibility schemes and general requirements, there are roles for the producers, but also for the member states in making the system work. Specifically, member states have an obligation to create specific incentives for the waste holders to participate in separate collection. So that's on the national authorities side, clear role for the authorities to put in place specific instruments so that households have a clear incentive to participate, not only an obligation, but also an incentive to participate. In addition, member states are obliged to take measures to reduce generation of waste. Specifically, Article 9 has been expanded significantly for the waste prevention part. And then again, there is an obligation for member states to incentivize reduction of waste generation, and pay-as-you-throw is specifically a useful tool to make that happen at the household level. And finally, of course, the polluter pays principle supports introduction of pay-as-you-throw schemes. Now, the Commission has already advocated the use of economic instruments, including pay-as-you-throw schemes in the past in different reports or recommendations given to the Member States. And most recently in September, the Commission issued a report on Member States' implementation of the waste legislation, which included a chapter called the early warning for Member States at risk of missing the 2020 target. And there very clearly, amongst recommendations that were given to some countries, pay-as-you-throw schemes featured quite highly. The Commission's report made clear that pay-as-you-throw schemes can be very effective at providing a clear financial incentive to citizens to sort recyclable waste from mixed waste. However, then the consultant's report also highlighted that they have to be implemented properly. I'm sure we'll hear about it more in subsequent presentations. Amongst the condition of success was a well-functioning and convenient recycling services, which are in place at least at the moment when pay-as-you-throw schemes are rolled out, but not afterwards, in order not to discourage citizens from taking part in it. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope that we'll have interesting insights in the following presentations. I'm happy to respond to questions, of course, should there be any.
Thank you so much. Yes, indeed. Yeah, okay, good, thanks. Indeed, I have a specific question to Mrs. Malgorzata. Actually, the fact of having incentives put in place in the framework of the Waste Directive as a precondition is important, but at the same time, we have in place the technical, environmental, economically practicable conditionalities. So isn't it a kind of a paradox to ask to evaluate the economically feasibility of these actions, and at the same time ask member states to put in place incentives? So what's the key in order to read this kind of two apparently opposite arguments?
Thank you. It's true that the 2008 directive, which introduced the obligation of separate collection, also allowed for put a conditionality, in fact, on when separate collection should be put in place. It's that conditionality, technically, economically, environmentally practicable. So these are the conditions that separate collection has to meet in order for the obligation to be in place, has been implemented by different member states in a different manner. And for this reason, in the revised Waste Framework Directive, this this so-called TEEP principle has been replaced by a more concrete obligation. So in fact, member states are obliged to have separate collection in place, and only in some specific circumstances, there are 4 different circumstances listed when they can derogate from it. However, the Commission is currently working on the guidelines that should help member states to transpose this obligation. What the co-legislators had in mind when putting this text in the directive was that, in fact, separate collection is an obligation. It should be overall implemented, and only in some very specific cases one can derogate from it. Member states also have to justify why they derogate. So now again, the burden is on the member states to indeed make appropriate analysis, to really find the right arguments proving that separate collection can be derogated from. And finally, I would say that these ambitious targets that we put in the directive will force member states to really push separate collection more, because, I mean, as it currently stands, these targets cannot be met without good, effective and widespread separate collection.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mrs. Malgorzata. And then, okay, let me prepare the next presentation, which is from Marta Vila here. Okay, let me see. Okay, let me try if it works in full screen now. Let's see. Okay, let's wait a little bit. Okay. Okay. Okay, so you have to use these.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Whoop. What happened? As you can see, we are online. um, no. Ah, okay. 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 So let's start. First of all, some considerations about the concept of waste, and especially about its economical value along the history. Okay. Yes. Okay. Initially, the waste generated in the cities were something useful that usually someone, for example, the peri-urban farmers pay for and they use as animal feed or to produce compost, because mainly it was bio-waste. But the higher amount and diversity of waste understood as something that nobody wants. So the quantity and diversity of waste generated has become a huge problem for our planet, and there is the need to give again value to waste, because it's still a resource, and it's a resource that we need. An example that I like to explain is, for example, with bio-waste, especially in the Mediterranean countries, where we have a lack of organic carbon in our soils, and we are wasting this resource in our landfills, in our incinerations. It's also a resource because also waste generates jobs. So we need to create, to give again this value for all the citizens, for all the stakeholders related to waste management. Okay. So all the actions and activities related to waste, from production, from collection, treatment, tax definition, and so on, must be consistent with that idea of creating a value that is something that is not waste, is something valuable. For example, well, in order to improve the results, both in prevention and also in separate collection, to achieve the objectives of recycling, it's important to introduce in a coordinated way different instruments. The first point is, as it was explained now, before introducing any campaign, any pay-as-you-throw system, we need to have a good technical scheme, that all the operative is correct, that everything is running. After this, we need also, it's important, a good legal framework, as now we are having from the framework waste directives to the ordinance at local level. We need also the piece of this puzzle about environmental education, and also participation. And we need, of course, also economical tools. We need all these pieces of the puzzle to get the final photo, to achieve the objectives. And all these pieces must be consistent one to each other. For the legal framework, as it has been explained, well, we have a clear targets, a clear objectives. These objectives must be reproduced at also regional level and local level. When we are talking about environmental education, that is one of the key also pieces of the puzzle, we are not talking only about a change of habits. We don't want citizens as robots making things without knowing anything. We are talking about creating critical thinking. We are talking about creating new skills in our citizens. We are talking about raising awareness, raising the understanding of the impacts and effects of the lifestyles. We are providing opportunities for participation, for empowerment, for an active involvement of the different stakeholders. And we are talking also about gaining experiences, increasing knowledge and understanding of the contents we need to create this critical thinking that is the final objective. For example, in Waste for Think project, we have created for all the pilots an environmental education strategy with where we have defined the targets, the messages, the partial objectives, and all the actions and the relation between actions and the different implementation of the actions with different stakeholders, with the different common objectives and partial objectives. And the main characteristics we are trying to apply in all the social action plans, that it's not easy, is to raise the participation and the interaction with citizens, with economical activities, with industry, with politicians, to increase also planning. A mid-long-term planning regarding environmental education is something that it's not often we can find often. Also, as Ainhoa said in the first presentation, the integration with ICT tools, and especially in the 3 pilots where we are working around the pay-as-you-throw and applying pay-as-you-throw systems, the integration with economical tools. And of course, monitoring, because we want to know the results, the lessons learned, what is successful, what not, and how can we improve in each environmental education strategy. Oh. Okay, we have defined a very simple habit change scheme from information to the change of the habit. From the information where people knows that do separate collection at source, that do prevention activities, at source, they know that is something good, they have data, they have information, but sometimes this information means a change of habits, but sometimes not. It's not enough with this information. From information to awareness, okay, I know that it's good, and I have the intention because I know that it's something that I would like to do, but then sometimes, again, we get the habit, the change of habits, but sometimes not. And we want to reach this final, this final change. I really do the separate collection. I really do. I'm going to buy with reusable bags, for example. No? What happens? There are some excuses, I would say. There are some barriers that we need to overcome. And we need to understand these barriers to search the solution, to search how to overcome these barriers. there is a clear, now. For example, if we imagine that we do a survey, and I think that almost 90% of the results of the people that with the survey will say that yes, now are you doing separate collection? Yes, of course. But then in a lot of municipalities, the separate collection rate is what it is. No? So why, if people knows that they must do separate collection, why some of them, 50%, I don't know, depends, don't incorporate these habits. No? I have made like a divertimento here with in the form of hashtags. No, the typical ones, for sure there are more, but the typical ones, I don't have a space at home. After I separate, it's mixed all together. I do it, but other people don't do it. No, this is very typical. I do, but other not. Someone is getting profit and it's my effort. No, economical things. I already paid my taxes. Someone else have to separate because I'm paying, no, for this. Oh, it's very difficult. Containers are far, and a large etc. That we can add here. So what is happening? How we can overcome, no, this kind of excuses or these barriers that we have. Wow. Okay. So. We have tried in the Waste 14 project also to search the success factors to achieve the final goals. There are a number of factors, but we want to highlight 4 of them. 3 of them are under the umbrella of the how to rise co-responsibility with the system users. And we highlight here the loss of anonymity, the rise of awareness and generation of critical thinking, as I said before, and also the economic consciousness. And the other one is the quality of conditions or positive discrimination for separate collection versus residual fraction. So it's important to give value to waste, as is the way I started the presentation. So why in some cities we have a lot of opportunities in form of residual fraction containers to put our waste mixed, and we have less containers, or we have less opportunities to put our waste correctly separated at source. No? This, what message we are giving to the citizens with this? Regarding the loss of anonymity, we need the first step is that we need a user identification. For example, with door-to-door collection with smart bins, it's like to have the gas meter or water meter, and we have here the waste meter. Usually it's perceived as a control of some big brother that is looking to what we are doing with our waste. This mixed with the issue that, as I said, 90% or more, if we do the surveys, is saying, yes, I'm doing separate collection because I know that I have to do, leads to increase of the separate collection or a change in the habits regarding separate collection. In my opinion, it have this user identification, this new meter for waste, have to be very well explained, and have to we need to have a justification. I mean, for example, a finality. For example, that a collection operative improvement could be, but especially the final application of benefits for the users, as in a pay-as-you-throw scheme. Could be pay-as-you-throw, could be other kind of benefits for the users. Also, the user identification gives us a lot of information regarding the user's patterns, the user's habits. This information could be used also for communication, for a better communication with different kind of users, citizens, economical activities, so on. We have here the second success factor, that is the awareness and generation of critical thinking. Here again, the introduction of these ICT tools, of these smart technologies, allow us to have a lot of data that could be used in a very interesting way, and we are working also in Waste for Think project about this, to increase the communication, a dialogue with the citizens. For example, no, Michele will introduce afterwards the know as you throw concept that is more or less introduced in an app we have created in the framework of Waste for Think to help the users of the system to know what are they doing, to compare with the municipality results, to also send suggestions, to send comments in a communication, a bilateral communication with the municipality, with the waste management stakeholder or company. That I think that is really interesting to create this awareness, this increased participation with the users. The third success factor is the economic consciousness. Michele is going to talk after, so I'm not going to talk about a lot about this. But as I said, we need the information and different kind of benefits for the user could be introduced as pay by generation, volume, or weight, pay by participation regarding the kind of use of the system. We can do some tax discounts. We can make some direct awards of discount vouchers, something like this. There is something interesting here that also with different surveys in different municipalities, citizens said that economic issues are really important to change habits. No? There is one of the barriers when you ask why you are not doing a separate collection. Oh, because nobody's going to pay me for this, or I'm doing this effort and my neighbor don't, and we pay the same. But then when you introduce pay as you throw, yes, you can have some changes, but it's not the main factor to increase separate collection. This is an example, it's very interesting, the example in Seveso. This is the evolution of separate collection in Seveso along the years. You can see the moments, no? So the key factors when separate collection increased or decreased in Seveso, for example, with the introduction of food waste collection, usually not only because starts a new collection, but also because when you start a new collection, usually you are doing a very intensive campaign to explain the new separation, so you are solving a lot of doubts regarding the other waste streams. So a huge increase in the results were achieved when they introduced this new collection. After this, they have been doing some specific intensive campaigns, but they have been working in different actions during the time. No? Not only one intensive campaign and then with a lot of time without doing environmental education, they have been doing different actions during the time. So they have been increasing slowly the separate collection. But when they started with the new bags with the chips, the RFID tag. So, okay, now the bags, somebody could know if this bag is mine or not, if I'm doing well, separate collection or not, before starting pay as you throw. Only with this monitoring effect, we can see that we have interesting increase in the total rate of separate collection. After this first effect of this monitoring big brother effect, I would say, well, nothing happens, so the separate collection can slowly go down. We have been monitoring, we have enough data to introduce pay-as-you-throw scheme. Okay, now it's time that we have everything. We have good awareness, we have this loss of anonymity, and we have the economical tool. So they are now up to 80% of separate collection. I think it's a good history, no? To summarize what I'm talking about this puzzle. Finally, as I introduced before, we have to introduce, to develop a good collection scheme where residual waste have at the minimum the same opportunities to be separated that the other fractions, the source separated fraction, the recyclable fractions. For example, in a door-to-door collection, we can collect only once per week or less residual fraction. And in a smart bin collection, well, we can or pay a lot for the residual fraction, or we can also decrease the opportunities where the users can open the residual bin. And obviously, all the collection system has to work properly, because if you, for example, in a door-to-door collection or in a smart bin collection, if something is not running correctly, people has another excuse to don't do separate collection, to raise some problems to the measure, and so on. Well, I don't want to end the presentation without talking about some typical known activities that have developed in the framework of Waste for Thing, and that are successful and have a very good result, as for example, direct contact with citizens, because now we are introducing a lot of ICT tools, but also this direct person-to-person contact with the citizens, with the users, talking about the problems, the doubts, and recording suggestions and so on, are really successful. And we don't have to miss this kind of actions. Also, the participatory activities, I think that are especially relevant in waste management. And also the exemplarity of public administration. We can't ask something to the citizens, to the other stakeholders, if we as public administration, who is planning, who is the waste management, the waste collection, are not introducing in our premises the same that we are asking to the citizens. And that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marta.
I introduce it. Yes. Well, now turn for Michele.
Thank you. The limitation of the webinars, kind of logistics. Okay. And by the way, many of the topics I will talk about have been already introduced by Marta, so I will go on quicker. I will introduce the concept of pay-as-you-throw, starting from some consideration about its application all around Europe. I investigated a little bit about the application of pay-as-you-throw, generally speaking. Oh, why? Always the same. Yeah. This is Windows 10. It's not my fault. No, it's Microsoft. Okay. So yes, I had the opportunity to revise a little bit of the implementation of pay-as-you-throw across Europe, as introduced formerly by Mrs. Margorzata. It's foreseen specifically as an instrument to be put in place at European level. And we know that pay-as-you-throw is gaining momentum. There are a lot of initiatives, like both from the legislative point of view, like in France, they are targeting possibly reaching out up to 25 million people with pay-as-you-throw. Catalonia is willing to introduce a new waste tax, and Gemma Nuales will talk about this later on. Other local issues, like in Portugal, the national authority approved the possibility of implementing pay-as-you-throw by publishing a guideline. And in Italy, nowadays we have one congress every week about pay-as-you-throw, even 2 congresses per week. I have some Italian representatives here. So it's quite famous. A lot of local administration are investigating into it. I also did a survey updating a former review that was assessed by the European Commission in 2012. And basically, mostly all member states implemented pay-as-you-throw to a fewer or larger extent. There are whole countries with pay-as-you-throw in place, like Austria, for instance. Also Germany, it's almost all covered with pay-as-you-throw schemes. And also some capitals have pay-as-you-throw implemented, like Berlin, Dublin, Ljubljana, very famous, even Vienna. The difference is that there is all around Europe a common scheme that is very commonly spread, which is basic. It's a kind of basic pay-as-you-throw in place, for instance, in Germany, and this is the typical scheme in Germany. You choose the volume of the bin of residual waste, you choose the frequency, and so it's simple. If you want 120 liters every 2 weeks, you pay €1, for instance. If you want it 240 liters and you want it every week, it's €4. It's linear, you choose every year. And that it's a pay-as-you-throw because you pay a variable tax, but I highlighted here some specifications. Let me try this. No, it doesn't work. Okay, just yeah, the easiness of the system is high because it's very easy, but on the contrary, the feedback to citizen is basically none because you don't have any real-time measurement, or even you cannot do individual measurement in buildings unless you put in place some system like the chamber systems, which is more advanced. Okay, now I did it wrong. I knew it. Well, no, okay. It's also quite adaptable. If you want from 1 year to the following one to reduce the volume of your residual waste, in Germany, in a Länder, they implemented this kind of scheme in which you can reduce the volume from 120 to 60 liters, and you pay for that volume in the following year. The system is in place in many cities, even large cities, as I said before, like Berlin, Munich, but even Copenhagen has this system, quite similar, with labels to be put as a sticker on the bin. And they have to be purchased every year, and they also, well, they are calculated in liters per week per building. And just an introduction about any other systems in place all around Europe, let's say, even Switzerland is not part of the European Union, but in Zurich, the Zurich system is quite common and is commonly known as a prepaid bag system, because these bags for residual waste are purchased directly in supermarkets or in post offices. And it's quite costly. It costs like, its price is like, what, 5.70 Swiss francs, which is roughly 5.50 euros per bag, per large bag, which is a good price. What happens in the case of Zurich is that people participate, they use the system, it's an individual system and anyone pays for the bag, but separate collection is 43%. So simply it means that people from Zurich, maybe they just want to pay, they just don't want to separate a lot. So it's not so linear, the relationship between paying a lot and separating a lot. There are many variables behind. Many other case studies, like Ghent in Belgium, where they also, yeah, it's close to here, they also pay for a little fee for the light packaging fraction. Ljubljana, for sure, it's the first European capital reaching high recycling and introducing pay-as-you-throw. Munich, Parma, and so on. As explained before, in Waste for Think, we are testing 3 schemes, and in this webinar, we are talking about mainly about the case of Samudrio and the case of Seveso in Italy. We are not mentioning a lot the case of Cascais because actually it has not been implemented as a real pay-as-you-throw scheme, but rather as a collective gamification and voluntary identification scheme. On the contrary, in Seveso, we implemented it since 2 years, and in Samudrio, they are starting it in 2 or 3 months. In Seveso, it's easy. Citizens go to vending machines with their social security card. They receive 1 roll of bag with RFID. The price of the bag is 2.30 euro. It's then collected by waste collector, and there is an antenna reading the RFID tag, and then the users, in the end of the year, receive an invoice, which is, in the case of Waste for Think, is generated by Softline, partner of Waste for Think. We have to say something about Seveso. Marta already mentioned, we had in Seveso a very high baseline. People were already aware about separate collection, also because of long-term sensitization on environmental issues, because of the chemical accident, you may be aware. So this is the baseline, 75%, and this is the result after pay-as-you-throw, 82%. It's a very good result. It's almost close to the theoretical maximum. But what does it mean? Residual waste reduced up to 60 kilos per capita a year. Impurities increased a little bit, especially in light packaging, because basically people are taking away items from residual waste and maybe putting some dirty plastic to light packaging. We got very interesting results, like for instance, the average set out of bags for more than 80% of users was less than 2 bags per month, or even 1 bag per month. So this means that you can reduce a lot the frequency of collection of residual waste, and it has to be done because it's an optimization. If you separate a lot, you generate a very little amount of residual waste. But this implies an adverse effect, that if we pay just for residual waste, the variable part of the tax is limited. It's something around 20–25 euro per year per family. And the difference between the bad guys and the good guys in this case is something around 10 euros. So is this really an incentive to separate better in a situation in which anyone is already separating a lot? This is one of the questions. This is already mentioned, but again, this is the combination of factors that we have to take into account in pay-as-you-throw. The incentive effect, is it enough or not? The quality of recyclables. As we know that the European Waste Framework Directive is focusing a lot more on recycling than on separate collection. We need high quality separate collection. So we don't want systems in which we are separating, taking away something from residual waste and putting some impurities in paper, plastics, or food waste. So these has to be, according to me, the precondition of any system. Then fairness, for sure, it has to be evaluated and carefully addressed. Recycling versus prevention. Sometimes pay-as-you-throw is considered to foster waste prevention. It's not always like this. It should, but it's not always like this. Because if we simply ask to separate something and to remove it from residual waste, people just separate it and put it into plastic, paper, and food waste, not putting in place waste prevention attitudes. And then, for sure, littering has to be taken into consideration, and possible cheats. What I'm talking about, littering, yes, this is one of the cases that we have seen in Italy with the locked waste containers in which people abandoned waste close to the containers. Quality of recyclables. If I have a system in which possibly I could move from residual waste to light packaging, this could be a problem. By the way, this is the case of Samudio, and they are thinking about it in order to address this issue. And what I'm referring to when talking about cheats, if an user can, let's say, play some trick and say, well, I try to adapt to the system by doing some tricks, then there is a low perception of fairness. For instance, I'm aware of systems in which there is no difference between families with 1, 2, or 3, or 5 people in the family. So this is kind of not fair because the generation and the capability of separating waste is very different from a family with 1 people, from a family with 5 people. So pay-as-you-throw is one of the many tools. And in order to come to a conclusion, introducing again the concept of communication, the pocket and the economical incentive part should be just one part of the scheme. And we have to be aware of other tools ranging from policies to civism, to the knowledge, to the fact of having tools, even other boundary conditions like emergency. What do I mean? In many municipalities in Italy, separate collection boosted when there was a landfill closing immediately, so there were no solution, like in Campania around Naples. And so in that situation, people wanted separate collection. We want to start it now. On the contrary, in a situation in which you just don't know anything about waste treatment, you have maybe, I don't know, an MBT, an incinerator or something taking care of your residual waste, people just don't see the emergency and the need for improving. The concept of know as you throw has been presented in the beginning like a joke. Now it's more like something that we disseminate in congresses. Let's see how it will work. It's simply to analyze the effect, as said before, of having some kind of big brother monitoring of your generation, which is the case B, in which you know that someone is looking at you, but also going on for a step to case C, in which you see that you receive a feedback also. You receive a feedback related to your individual behavior. The fact is that pay-as-you-throw usually provides info once per year, which is the invoice you receive. And maybe sometimes it's even not too detailed, not so appealing. You don't see exactly your generation, you're not aware. While on the contrary, know as you throw, Kate, is about giving individual, detailed, and frequent feedbacks, also to the bad guys. And this is, I think, one of the key points. This is one case, just to mention. This was the Big Brother effect put in place in Cremona, in which randomly people were asked to use standard bags with barcodes, and they were said, well, maybe we will randomly control you and see what's your generation and look inside your residual waste bags. So the baseline was 72%, the follow-up result was 88%, just because of this awareness of being monitored. The Citizens app of Ways for Think is another element. The fact is that apps or web pages are usually looked at by people that is already sensitized, because they want to look about their waste generation. Well, it depends. Sometimes they want to be sure that the bag delivered the day before was correctly read by the antenna, or, well, so it's a particular target of people using the apps. We want, and I personally would like to, address the so-called bad guys. So use instruments that are directly saying something to those that are not separating waste. For instance, one of the options is using, and we have submitted a live proposal. We should know something this month about this, which is based on using WhatsApp as a communication tool to citizens. So everyone has WhatsApp, and it's very easy to look at it, even just without asking anything. Is just to receive information maybe once per month. And finally, this is a new project we are putting in place: the use of know as you throw through vending machines. In Italy, we have many situations in which standard waste bags are delivered through vending machines, like in Seveso, for instance, in the Waste for Think project. The idea is to show individual information when citizens get their roll of bag. This is one example. It's a draft example. We are putting in place something similar in Bergamo, Italy. So the screen on the vending machine could say, "Good morning, Mr. Smith. Are you doing it right? I see from my database that in the last 6 months, you picked 3 rolls of bag. I know that the average of 4 people, families like yours, picked up 2.2 rolls. So you're slightly above average. Please be careful. You can do better. Please." Anytime a citizen go to the vending machine from a random control, this is your bag. We took a picture of your bag and it's correctly separated. So good, you have done it right. Or learn to better separate on this website and so on. So like 30-second messages delivered obligatory to every citizen. So it's a kind of new, it implies for sure privacy issues or communication issue, how to deliver this message properly in order to make this change of habit occur. So in conclusion, pay-as-you-throw is a key instrument, widely promoted. The effectiveness of the schemes and its perception is related to many boundary conditions that have to be carefully evaluated. And the quality of recyclable fraction should be the focus of any collection and payment scheme. And I would stress on the fact of this issue of having a lot of data from pay-as-you-throw, and we have to use this big data, and it's the period of innovation and the use of big data for many purposes, so let's do it. And know as you throw is one of the examples. Thank you very much. Good. Okay, I see that there are still 24 participants online. Thank you for following. Okay, so let me stop sharing a little bit. Okay. And then it's the turn of Jean-Benoit. Yeah. Jean-Benoit Bell from SCR Plus. Again, thanks for hosting us in this room. So you can take.
Yep.
Okay, let me share
Thank you. But I feel like there will be a bit of repetitions.
Well,
Hopefully we are consistent. So I will talk about mainly a study ACR Plus did a few years ago on pay-as-you-throw system across Europe, and some figures from Horizon 2020 project collectors, and pay-as-you-throw more to demonstrate the effectiveness.
Okay.
And yeah, a slide you've already seen, but maybe in a more simplified way, just as a first word. Pay-as-you-throw is something you use to put in place a proper waste behavior, let's say, to the citizens, to inhabitants and waste producers. And to ensure these proper behaviors, there's several key requirements. The first one is the proper information, like people have to know what they're supposed to do. Then they have to get the right equipment and service to do so. And then they must have a kind of motivation to act properly. And this is where pay-as-you-throw goes into play. Just to say that it's only one instrument among a bunch of instruments. And when you look at successful strategies at local level, it's usually a mix of instruments. That being said, it's one of the most, let's say, powerful instruments. And really, I will show you in this presentation that there's a clear difference between those people not using it and territories using it. So we did these studies in 2016, having like documenting 7 territories, 7 cities across Europe that implemented pay-as-you-throw. And just like the report is much more extensive, but I want to show you the graph. So if you look at those graphs, you've got residual waste in blue and separate collection in red, and then the total, like the sum of both, in green. And here it's in Intersa in Belgium, consortium in Belgium. And here, when they implemented, you can see in the gray areas where they enforced pay-as-you-throw, like they had a decrease of separate collection, and residual waste was already very low, and it remained at the same level. So it had a prevention effect. In Besançon, east of France, they established it, enforced it progressively. And here the main impact was an increase of selective collection and a decrease of residual waste. Same effects in Treviso, Italy, very famous case where you can see a clear decline in residual waste, a kind of slight increase in selective collection, and in like the waste went in other diversion routes. In Sweden, same here. You see a steady decline in residual waste and matching increase of separate collection. In Maastricht, same kind of big decrease of residual waste, increase of selective collection. Same thing this in Germany. And in Austria, you've got also the same figures. But you can see that the evolution is a bit different from, sometimes you have a big drop, sometimes it's more steady, sometimes all the quantities of even the separate collection decrease, so it has different impacts. One reason might be also that pay-as-you-throw is actually a concept that includes many different ways of implementing it. I think Michele already explained that the variable fee can be calculated in different manners, but actually it's a mix. The pay-as-you-throw system is usually a mix between a fixed charge, so people will have to pay a fixed amount that is not calculated according to how they use the service, and what we call a variable fee, which is according to how much waste you produce. And for all those fixed charge and variable fee, there's different system way of calculating it. So for the basic fee, you can have something according to the type, the size of the adults, the number of people that are collected, the size of the property. And for the service fee, there's also different way of calculating it. It can be only the volume of the bin. It can be how much waste collection the frequency of waste collection. It can be calculated according to the weight of the waste produced, or it can be a combination between the volume and the frequency, like the bag system. And you can see in the 7 documented cases, there's kind of a difference between the share of the fixed fee and the share on the variable fee. And this has, of course, a different effect. the variable fee, the bigger the variable fee is, the more encouraging it will be to promote the good action, but it can be also have more drawback effects. So moving on, does it work? Here we did a comparison between, you've got in green, the regional or national selective collection rates in average, and the one we noticed at the city level. So for the first three, it's actually in countries or regions where all the different cities have pay-as-you-throw systems. So there's not such a big difference between the case studies we had and the national or regional average. But in places where pay-as-you-throw is not that common, such as it was the case in Netherlands, in Sweden, in France, or in Italy, there's a huge difference. The case studies we focused on are really better than the national average. So it kind of shows that it is actually effective. And we tried to put in parallel all those different examples and try to see what were the main conclusions. The first main conclusion is that it's really important because we kind of present pay-as-you-throw as a miracle solution. It's not really the miracle solution, even though it's really effective. You also need to have good information on how citizens can diverse waste from the residual waste. Can be by home composting, food waste collection. So the citizen first need to know what they're supposed to do with the waste. Adequate equipment, and most of the case studies, they reported that the door-to-door collection helped with the implementation of pay-as-you-throw. Also because it make it easier to identify the waste producers. So to put the fair price on the waste producer. And in many cases, the inhabitant, the waste producers, they need to have also other motivation. They need to know the purpose of why they are doing that. There might be environmental reasons, can be economic or job creation, but they need to know why they're doing that. And they need also to be reminded about that. So to have like frequent reminder about how they should do it and why they are doing it. Something very important is also how you set the fee. So it's a balance. I think Michele told about that. It's you have to set it so that it's actually complying, like they have to make an effort. But if you put too quickly a high price on the variable part, or if you put the variable parts really high, you can have drawback effects. The first one is to encourage illegal behaviors. There's also like the fees are also meant to pay for the service. So you need to balance the cost. And if you put too much on the variable fee, you might be short to pay for the service. So you have to be careful about that. And the way you make people pay has also to be adapted to the type of housing. So in particular, vertical housing, you have to think of specific systems so that each household pay for their own waste and it's not shared among the apartment block, otherwise it has no incitation effects. About the results, what is clear is that in most cases, the main result is that it improves selective collection. That's something you can see in most cases, a drop of residual waste and improvements of residual collection. It works especially well on bio-waste, like combining pay-as-you-throw with the implementation of bio-waste collection is really effective, or on home composting. Usually, if you've seen prevention effects, it's linked with home composting, like the implementation of home composting. So on prevention, the impact is actually variable. It's not automatic. Usually you've got a transfer of waste from the residual bin to the selective collection or to civic amenity sites, but it won't have necessarily an impact on prevention. And something very important is how you monitor that and how robust this whole monitoring system is, because some citizen will question the data, and you have to be sure that the system, especially if you have a pay by weight system, that there's it's solid, it's well organized, and you have to closely monitor how people will react and if they will properly use the system or go into illegal behavior. Quite recently, ADEME, the French environmental agency, made a study about the perception of pay-as-you-throw and illegal behaviors. And what they found out is that in places where they implemented pay-as-you-throw, it's mostly well accepted, actually. So usually people are like decision makers are afraid of the consequence of pay-as-you-throw on the mood of citizens, let's say, but in most places people are happy with that. And most importantly, they see it as something fair because the people doing the effort pay less. But what they see is that sometimes people don't understand really clearly the system, like they don't even understand how they are charged. So sometimes there's a discrepancy between how they like it or their perception of the system and how it works. And on behaviors, it has positive behaviors, but there's still 1 out of 10 inhabitants that's reported in the surveys illegal behaviors, ranging from illegal dumping to burning waste in your chimney. So with different impact, but some negative impact indeed. And this is something that should be taken into consideration when implementing pay-as-you-throw systems, is that there will be some illegal behaviors. Usually when you ask the local authorities, they will say that the benefits from pay-as-you-throw are higher than those illegal behaviors, but it has to be taken into consideration. So it ranges from using the wrong containers. We've seen like the question of quality in packaging, but it can also be putting it in street bins, or what we call waste tourism, meaning like if you work in a place where there's no pay-as-you-throw, you will take your waste bag and bring it in where you work. So usually it's marginal, like if you take local data, you won't see it on the graphs, but it can be like some people might do it. Backyard burning, so not necessarily fire in the gardens, but simply putting it in the chimney, mainly for green waste, paper and cardboard. Then again, it's difficult to monitor, but when you do surveys, people tend to say that they will do that. And the most worrying part is illegal dumping. So it can be like people putting it next to other park of containers or putting it in the woods. And not too long ago, I read a study where they kind of monitor illegal dumping. It was in the east of France. And they found out that most of the waste dumped illegally was actually waste people are not supposed to pay for, like packaging or bio-waste. Yeah. So actually, it means that in most cases, it can be addressed through communication, saying, look, this waste, if you do the right thing, you don't pay for it. So this is something interesting. We kind of picture it as something inevitable, but it's not always the case. So to avoid that, communication is one of them. Adapting the fee system, there's several examples of disastrous pay-as-you-throw implementation where they've started with a very high fee, and then like people won't be ready for that, and more people will go for illegal dumping. And putting fines, like controlling, it can be controlling the content of the bin and finding addresses, or putting cameras in places where people might go for illegal dumping, and that could work too. Moving on to the collectors project, very quickly, it's a project that started last year, and we are actually at mid-life of the project. We are focusing on paper and packaging, and construction and demolition waste, and the idea is to find good practices for selective collection, but not necessarily the best performing territories, but also taking into account local constraints. Like we know that in very dense cities, where there's lots of vertical housing, it might be more complicated. Same with remote areas where collection cost might be very high, or you cannot set the same type of instrument than, let's say, more normal territories, or in places where there's not much resources, the idea is to have a look at that and see if we can find good practices that can fit those, like say, specific requirements. And the idea is that usually we look at selective collection under the prism of quantities, collected quantities, but here we want to have a more in-depth look at the quality of materials and what is done with that, meaning does it contribute to circular economy, for example? We want to also look at the economic performance, trying to show whether or not it's more expensive to go for an ambitious selective collection, or if there's, let's say, cheap way of improving municipal waste recycling. Looking also at environmental performance and what we call social acceptance, meaning how people will perceive those ambitious, let's say, waste strategy. So I won't be too quick on the presentation. I will be quick on the presentation of the project. Let's say that we had the first phase where we collected lots of data, and I will talk about that. Now we are kind of trying to figure out the good, interesting case and trying to identify and analyze those cases to see what are the good instruments and how expensive it is, what good it did for the local circular economy. And soon we'll move in the implementation phase, so disseminating the data and guideline and explaining what works for local authorities. Actually, if you're interested, we've got an event in 26th of June in Warsaw where we'll discuss social acceptance of waste collection systems. So you can register on the website. I will talk quickly about the data we collected for paper and packaging waste. We had a very intensive data collection, and for paper and packaging waste, we collected data for 135 waste collection systems, so mainly cities, which is actually about 12% of the EU population. So we can't say it's representative from the EU situation, but it's actually kind of big. And among those 135 collection systems, actually 54% of them use pay-as-you-throw systems. Then again, it can be volume-based or it can be pay by weight. There's quite a big diversity of pay-as-you-throw, so it might not be as effective everywhere, but still it's a quite big number. So this is average of capture rates for the different waste fractions for paper and packaging waste. In blue, you've got the average for pay-as-you-throw systems, and in yellow, the ones for like cities not using pay-as-you-throw. And you can see that for most, but composite, but I'm deducting my data on that, but for most of them, it's in average, it's a better capture rate for pay-as-you-throw systems. It might not look as much like the impact of pay-as-you-throw, but actually, if you isolate one parameter such pay-as-you-throw, collection mode, or sorting guidelines and compare it on average, there's very few instruments for which you can see such an impact. So pay-as-you-throw is one of the few instruments where when you look at it individually, you will see a difference between the cities using it and the cities not using it. Same here, maybe a bit more telling. This is the residual waste quantities per capita in average of cities using pay-as-you-throw and the selectively collected paper and packaging waste quantities. And this is the figures for non-pay-as-you-throw territories. So you can see quite a big difference among the residual waste quantities and the selective collected quantities. And last figures, this one might be a bit more complicating to grasp. So here you've got the capture rates for paper and packaging waste. And here you've got how much residual waste is produced compared to the total municipal waste. So for example, here in this place, most of municipal waste is residual waste. And here, residual waste is less than 10% of the total municipal waste. So the blue ones are the one using pay-as-you-throw, and the yellow ones are the one not using pay-as-you-throw. You can see that there's some exceptions. You can get some fairly good capture rates and very low residual waste regeneration, not using pay-as-you-throw. But when you look at the big picture, actually, you can see that most of the well-performing ones having high capture rates and low residual waste generation are using pay-as-you-throw, and most of the one not using like with lower performances are not using it. There are still some territories using pay-as-you-throw not doing great, so it's not sufficient in itself. But in general, like it shows that if you want to get better results, you've got better chance with pay-as-you-throw. So I'm done with my presentation. We're in this phase with collectors where we will disseminate more understandable, let's say, results. And in particular, in 1 month, we should disclose all the data from waste collection systems, individual fact sheets. We'll put them online through, let's say, a user-friendly tool. So I invite you to check our website and register, and we'll let you know when it's out. So thank you for your attention.
Good. let's try to simulate an audience.
Yeah.
And yeah, thank you, Jean-Benoit. Now it's the turn to pass the floor to some remote speakers. So if I'm not wrong, it should be Ikerne and Igots talking about the case of Samudio in the framework of the Waste for Think project. Ikerne, Igots, are you online? Are you available to share the screen?
Yes.
Okay, good. So,
Hello.
start. Hello, Igots.
How are you?
We are fine, good. So you can start sharing with the green button. And try to keep it in 10 minutes if you can. We are running a little bit late, but well, as you. Okay, good.
Can you see it?
Yeah, very good.
Okay. Well, why to implement pay-as-you-throw in Samudio? Well, first of all, waste management is one of the key areas of municipal environmental policy, and PAYT has been shown in several places, as we have seen just now, very positively to reduce generations and improve selective collection. Well, of course, European legislation calls for a reduction in generation of waste and the use of this system. In our case, we start from the system of the containers, because it is a system that is implemented and well, people is used to use it here, and so we will continue with the same system, and we think that this can help us to obtain a change of habits without creating rejection. And there is no such system maybe that combines containerization and PAYT, and well, we think it's an opportunity in the project, in which Waste for Think project, to do maybe a first complete test. We know there have been some tests, but maybe this one could be the most complete one. And we want to apply the door-to-door system in the industrial area, because due to the dispersion of different companies. So in this case, this model, we think that could be the most effective. The most advantageous features, first of all, incentive for prevention and recycling. It helps to improve collection percentages, and it's reliable in the calculation of the rate. The collection is efficient and time and shortness. And it makes the management of the change easier, because citizens, they have only to do a minimum modifications of habits. I mean, they have to separate the waste at home and throw it into the appropriate container. That's the bigger change they must do. And the second one, they must open the container with the citizen card. So I think for them could be very easy, very easy. And what are the risks? Well, it has a high technological complexity. We know that's maybe the most difficult thing. It can have average maintenance costs. But we think for people and companies and for everybody, it's an opportunity to pay less. We want to do, or will do, the container monitoring with electronic opening in all the containers, and camera or drawer system. I mean the chamber system. You've been talking about them later, and identification, and in some cases the weighing of the waste. Means to be able to separate. We will give people different tools like wetware tools, training, games, and different tools to be able to separate properly. And we'll have a simulation period starting in the 1st of June and of July, sorry, and a shadow invoicing in this next 6 months, starting the 1st of July until the end of the 2019. We'll have complete islands. Now it's easier to not to separate than to separate, because the rest fraction it's the easier the easier one. You can find more rest fraction containers than the other ones, and this is the first thing we must change, and we are now changing it. We have done a complete cost. Well, we have calculated the cost we have now, but we have simulated the cost we will have in different scenarios depending on the behavior of the people and companies and everybody. So what we need and what we want is, in any case, that the cost of the treatment and the collection of the waste will be paid by users. So this is also important, and to know what different scenarios we can have, and in all of them the cost that will be paid. So the pay as you throw, and the tax is directly related with the costs. Types of PAYT we are going to implement in Zamudio. One is the residential one, and in this case we have 2 different ones. The first one is for houses up to 5 people, and the second one is for houses of 6 people or more. The second one is for commercial ones. The third one is hospitality, and the last one for industrial. In the case of industrial, there are 2 different industrial PAYTs. The first is for in door-to-door system, and the second one is in containerized areas. The second one will use it in those buildings or areas where we have many offices, and it's most difficult to do a door-to-door system. So in those cases, we will use a containerized system, so the tax and the PAYT will be also different. And all types have been contrasted in participative processes with the affected groups. In all the cases, we'll implement complete islands of separate fractions with electronic opening. And all the residual fractions will be volumetric, except of the door-to-door system with volumetric control. And this control could be 25 liters, modulable to 20 or 15. Sorry. And the rate will be divided in two parts. One is the fixed part, and I give right in the residential one to have a number of quarterly contributions to the residual fraction, to the rest fraction, and however someone proves that is separating, they can have a reduced rate in the fixed part. And a variable portion that the price for extra contribution to the residual fractions to those that get or give more residual waste. And those who prove that they separate, they can get a reduced rate. And this is the Excel where it's explained more or less the PAYT. The rate is, the fixed rate is 26 euro, the reduced rate is 16 euro, and the variable rate is 2 euro each time that to appropriate waste and well, a bag of 25, maximum 25 liter. And the reduced rate is 1 euro, and the reduced rate in fixed part or variable part is applied when somebody demonstrates that their contribution of organic, light packaging and paper cardboard in each trimester is as much as the apportation of comminglet or rest residual waste. And we ask only for one glass, for using only once in these 3 months, using the glass container. We will have also nappies. We will get the nappies separately. So we want. So I think it's more for justice with women and people or families with children and elder people that use nappies too. In the case of commercial waste, the implementation of complete takedowns of separate fractions, as always, and they will have also the residual fraction with volumetric control. And the rate is divided in two parts: the fixed part that gives right to a number of quarterly contributions, and the variable portion. In the variable portion, there's a price for extra contribution to the residual fraction. In this case, there is no reduced rate, because the commercial PAYT or the commercial, I mean, the shops have different habits and different. They generate different, very different waste depending on the type of the shop. I mean, it's not it's not the same shop that sells, for example, vegetables than shops that sells clothes. It's very different, the waste they generate. So it's not a typical generation. So that we decided with them to do this one, that only well, they pay a fixed part, and then well, the variable rate that in this case it's quite expensive. So we think it will work properly. The hospitality, I mean, bars, restaurants, they will work as residential ones with the volumetric control, and the rate will be divided in the same way that in the residential ones. In this case, we ask well, the tax is different, is more expensive. But what the separation or the habits we ask for are different. We ask for organic, like packaging, paper, but we ask for more glass than we do to residential ones because, well, we all know that bars, restaurants, etc. generate much more glass than we do the families. So I think this one, well, is more appropriate in this case for this one, for hospitality. Industrial PAYT door-to-door, the collection of the residual fraction and paper cardboard will be door-to-door collection. And other collections or other fractions could be also requested to do door-to-door in the cases that someone generate, for example, more much like packaging or organic. And well, we'll implement separate fraction islands with electronic opening like always. And the rate will be divided in two parts, the fixed part and the variable parts. The variable part will also divide it in two parts. They will pay for number of contributions and by the weight they contribute. The rate will be 65% of the current tax that they have now. This current tax depends on the people that is working on this company, in this company, and depends also on the activity of the company. And the variable rate, it's well, 200 euro per ton, and for each rest collection will be 6 euro. I think it's very easy for them to calculate their cost. In the case of Zamudio, the 70% of the waste collected, especially the rest fraction collected in Zamudio, is industrial. You have much industry, and for us is the biggest problem in this area. The containerized industrial PAYT. In this case, as I said, in the cases we have industry or offices and buildings where there are many companies and we have difficulties to do a door-to-door system. In these cases, the rate will be very similar to the citizen or to the residential one. The rate will be divided in two parts, the fixed part and the variable part, and the fixed part will include fixed costs and a quarterly number of contributions. And the variable part includes payment for the number of extra contributions to the residual fractions. And this is the tax. It's 196 euro with a reduced tax of 98 euro and a variable part with 6 euro for its apportation and 3 euro the reduced tax of the variable part. We ask here only in order to demonstrate that they are separating as much like packaging and paper cardboard separation as the rest fraction they apport to the containers. So this is the containerized industrial PAYT, and that's all. Hello.
Okay, thanks, Igor. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Welcome.
It is an interesting case study because, as you have seen, they are measuring basically all recyclables, not only residual waste, but also paper, glass, plastics, and food waste. And all of these elements come into place when calculating the tax. Now we have as a speaker a member of ACR Plus, the Catalan Waste Agency. We should have Gemma Noales online. So, okay. Gemma, are you there? Maybe you can unmute your microphone.
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, Gemma.
Hi, hello.
Hello.
Good
Thanks
afternoon.
Thanks for joining. And
Thanks.
sorry for being a little late.
Okay, don't worry. And the camera
The camera is not working now.
is not working?
Okay, maybe, no, maybe no, let me see. Now?
Okay, start my video.
Yeah,
Hi,
good.
now.
Hi, very good.
Hello,
Hi, Gemma.
thank you for the invitation. Thank you to Wait for Thing, Ars, Michele, Marta, and happy to be here with you.
Yes.
So I will share my screen, okay?
Yes, good.
Okay. This is the
Also,
presentation.
in 10, 15 minutes, it's okay?
I will try to simplify as much as possible. Okay.
Good.
So, okay. First slide. Some milestones about the history of the waste management here in Catalonia to put you in situation. In 1993, we have the first waste law. After that, in 96, we started with the implementation of organic waste collection. In 200, we have the first door-to-door collection systems working. And in 2004, we have operative the landfill tax and the refund system. That is an important instrument in the Catalan strategy. Later on, in 2011, we have door-to-door with PAYT systems. And in 2013, we introduced technology, identification technology in the door-to-door collection schemes. Recently, in the last years, we put in place some pay per participation schemes with door-to-door collections. That is a specific schemes or systems that are in Catalonia. And recently also we try to introduce, or the municipalities implement pilots about identification closed containers. And by...
Gemma, just one thing, the audio is a little bit noisy.
See?
Maybe move the, I don't know, the microphone.
Here, because I have my headphones.
There are a lot of clicks.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's the cable.
The cable also, but I don't know because...
Or
now
maybe
better?
It's the same. Can you use the microphone of the laptop or something?
Yeah, we'll try.
If not, it's okay. Yeah?
Are you listening now?
Okay.
Yes, better?
Okay, better. Yeah, a little
closer
to the video, and it's okay.
Okay. So
okay, good.
I will try to continue. And finally, we expect this new law, waste law, by the next year. So this is the little history, but we want to highlight that the key instruments that Catalonia implemented has been the mandatory separate collection of organic fraction, some the grants for organic collection implementation for the municipalities, and especially, as mentioned, the landfill and incineration tax with the tax refund system that, as you can see in this slide, this is the scheme of this tax and the refund. And this is an incentive to promote door-to-door collection, organic fraction collection, but also PAYT schemes for the municipalities. Okay. So this is an interesting experience and singular experience that are in Europe that can be reproduced to promote these elements that improve the separate collection. Okay, this is a first show of the rates of separate collection in Catalonia that are 40% and the residual waste is 60%. The recycling tax are about 40% and landfilling are another 40%. So we are quite far from the objective of 2020 and 2035. Okay, so we have to work to improve these indicators to comply with the directive. Some more ideas about the situation in Catalonia. We have our own objective, 60% of separate collection in Catalonia, and the general model is road containers, but we are spreading also door-to-door systems. Now we have 204 municipalities, and as mentioned, we are also implementing identification closed containers, and there are some experience starting these days. So we pass to talk about the current PAYT experiences. The first one is commercial door-to-door plus PAYT schemes. The sound is good now, Michele?
Yes, yes.
Okay,
Perfect.
it's to be sure. Okay, so because the first experiences and these PAYT schemes are good, are functioning very good, is this commercial door-to-door systems with PAYT. In Barcelona, we have a big implementation for commercial access and big generators. And in this case, they pay per volume for organic fraction, paper, glass, and light packaging, and pay per volume plus number of services for the residual waste. So this is implementation implemented in Barcelona, as mentioned, with big producers and commercial access, with very good results in terms of quantity and quality. And for another example, we have Canet de Mar, that is a similar scheme that pays per volume for organic waste and pays per volume plus the number of services for residual waste and also for light packaging. Okay, now talking about tax for citizens, we have the first two or three in this case experiences that were Argentona, Mirabetti, Rasquera. They implemented back prepaid systems. In this case, they have bags for residual waste and for packaging. At the first period, they pay for all the bags. Citizens have to prepay for all the bags, but with the time they simplify the tax and establish a minimum of quantity of bags per household, and the citizens have to only pay for the bags needed, extra bags needed. Okay. In the case of Argentona, after a few years, they also eliminate the payment for light packaging in order to avoid losses of this material in terms of tourism of waste. Okay, so this is the first experiences with prepaid in Catalonia, but now we have some others. This is another specific case with door-to-door collection with identification system for Delivery Cadiz in Celrà, and they have a 20 euros discount per household if they deliver the organic fraction and the light packaging one per week. It's another type of giving an incentive in the tax and they make some corrections considering the number of inhabitants as mentioned before, because it's important to relate the inhabitants with the type or habits of delivery of waste. Okay, so another one that are the newest experiences are Rio de Cañas with this paper participation plus paper generation. They have a fixed part of the tax of 50 euros and a variable part, and they pay per participation and have a unit discounts for organic fraction, light packaging and paper according to the deliveries that people provide to the system, with a minimum amount per year, and another part that is a paper generation, because they have a unit cost for residual fraction deliveries with a minimum amount per year. In these tables, you can see the unit prices. The first part are negative, so they have discounts for the separate fractions, and positive unit cost for residual deliveries. This is a scheme where you can see the difference between the people that recycle, they can pay 80 euros, and people that are not recycling good, they can pay until 243 euros per household and year. So this is the average that they can get in terms of the type of habits of recycling. And another similar experience, but that are not considering the residual fraction, is Vilabalareis, that are implementing or operating a paper participation scheme. They only consider a part for light packaging and a cost for organic fraction, and they have 4 ranges according to the number of deliveries of the caddies of these fractions during the year. The rates increase when you provide to the system a less number of deliveries of these fractions. So this is considered a paper participation. In this table, you can see the amounts related to the number of deliveries. More number of deliveries, less cost for the participants. This is the type of caddies, and they use an app to provide information. That is another important issue, as mentioned, to the participants with the receipt of waste and so on. And finally, considering the current paid experiences, we have a voluntary identification system with NFC mobile and open containers made in Mancomunitat de l'Urgellet. It's a pilot experience with 200 families, 9 municipalities, and they establish some rules to get a discount of 16 euros with a tax, total tax of 120 euros. If they provide or access the containers 1 time per week for organic fraction, light packaging, 1 time every 15 days for residual fraction and paper, and 1 time per month for the glass, they can get the 60 euros discount. If you can see in the table, finally, with the results of this pilot, the people, only 72% of the people obtained this discount. So the rest were out of the pilot, were not participated, and finally only the 53% obtained more than 10 euros of discount. So the conclusion is that people started to go out of the pilot, and these 60 euros seems that were not sufficient to encourage people to participate and do this good separation as was expected initially. Okay, so finally, with these experiences in Catalonia, we can conclude some ideas and some some important instruments or elements that we have to consider when we are implementing these schemes. As mentioned, a lot of them were already mentioned, but we can try to resume again them. We have different schemes here in Catalonia, depending on the context and the needs. We have paper generation and paper participation with different type of fraction, the residual one, but also with the selective fractions. The schemes are basically based on the number of deliveries and the volume, or both elements, but not on the weight. Here, with the context and urbanism, we have difficulty to implement PAYT based on household Binker site collection in comparison to the rest of Europe and USA or Canada that are simple schemes. With these new schemes that are operative, we implement more equitable taxes, but we have to take into account to review the effects of paper participations depending on the number of inhabitants per household or the prevention practices of the users. So we have to define, as mentioned, consistent rates and schemes, and normally we need a testing period of the household's delivery practices to elaborate or to create this scheme or the rates to have these fair taxes and good calculated. Another issue that already was mentioned, especially we see this with the pilot in the zone of the Mancomunity of Urgellet, is that we have to think about the level of cost that we have to pay for the waste collection, because sometimes we need a high rate to make the recycle, the users modify the habits of recycling and the habits of separation at source. So this is important because sometimes we will need to increase a lot the taxes or the difference between the good and bad recyclers. Another issue is the fraud practices and the waste tourism, especially in some schemes. There are more possibilities or opportunities to do that. Regarding the link to the identification clause containers, sorry, there is a sound that I don't know where it comes. The pay link to identification clause container without chamber sometimes not ensure the volumes that are delivered, and also have the possibility to have fraud practices. So this is another issue that should be considered when these kind of systems are implemented. Another important element is the identification technology should be reliable and easy to operate, because if we don't have this good technology, we cannot get good data to work with it. And it's needed this part of communication and inspection activities to accompany the system and to ensure the good results. And finally, we have to process data and have a good household inventory. And as mentioned, the data should be reliable to calculate the taxes, and that these taxes can be effective and considered in the municipalities to have. Sorry, there is a sound. Can be, I don't know if it's from my side.
No, don't worry, Gemma. It's just because we are preparing the interactive session.
Okay.
Sorry,
so the two final slides about the new law. The Agency of Catalonia is working on a new law about waste prevention and waste management, but also about efficient use of resources to improve the rates of separate collection and recycling, and to promote waste prevention. And the final objective is to get the targets of the European Union, and this new law will introduce these elements: taxes that cover 10% of the cost of waste management, the taxes that transfer integrally to the citizens the cost of the waste management, and that should be equitable taxes, fair taxes. So these PAYT schemes will be introduced, will be promoted, and also can introduce the technology or promote the technology to identify the users, and then have the chance to individualize the collection service with these door-to-door collection systems or closed identification containers to follow the practices and the generation and deliveries of the users of the collection system. And finally, this law wants to guarantee the information and transparency about the municipal waste management and the costs and balances related to this management. And to complement, as mentioned, the issue of the implementation of the organic fraction, the door-to-door schemes, and these individualized and schemes of collection and PAYT schemes, the landfill tax should be a key instrument, and this tax will increase between 3 and 5 euros per ton until 2035, and some of the refund concept will be reviewed or extended to provide another incentive regarding the return of the money to the municipalities that are working with waste management. And a final note about the PREMET, that is the Metropolitan Plan of the area of Barcelona, that concentrates the half of the population in Catalonia. That this program also includes following the instructions or the new Catalan law, this development of individualization systems for commercial and also domestic users, the implementation of taxes, collection taxes for household and also for commercial, and the introduction of payment per generation and PAYT schemes also for both type of generators. So half of the population of Catalonia will also be in these schemes or under these schemes with this framework of 2025. So for my part, that's all. Thank you very much, and sorry for the inconvenience of the transmission.
Thank you, Gemma. Thank you so much for your contribution and for the relevant case studies, especially looking at new combination and new systems in place to be deployed in Catalonia, including these new options that you refer as to pay per participation, which is a kind of reward for the generation of dry recyclables. Okay, and we ran a little bit late, but I would like anyway to try to perform this interactive part. We have some assistants here on site and some as well online. So for those online, there will be for all of you now the possibility to talk. You have simply to push the raise hand instrument that you have on your Zoom application, and then I can allow you to talk, but also you are welcome to use the chat if you want, and by now we can maybe start talking here inside the room to do some final considerations while we are waiting for your comments. I will be looking at the screen. As soon as you have something to ask, please do it. Meanwhile, let's maybe change the micro in order to use this. So, okay, so now yes, good. Okay. Okay, any final considerations, even from the audience? Maybe Jean-Benoit, we want as a host of the webinar to draw and wrap up a little bit according to the... Well, you can use this one, it's okay.
Okay. So much technology. It's nice to see that pay-as-you-throw is expanding toward the EU, I guess. I think it's really, yeah.
No, it's okay.
Okay, it's really considered as one very interesting instrument, and maybe in the future it will be the common way of doing things. I think it's important to, as with any instrument, we discuss a lot with economic instruments like landfill tax, incineration tax. They are mainly a label, and it's important to see that there's many different ways of doing it. And as always with waste management, you have to pick the right one according to the specificity of the territory, the type of audience, and yeah, one recommendation would be to start slow and progressively, and to mix it with different other instruments, I would say. So I will be really interested in seeing what's happening in Catalonia, because it's a very heterogeneous territory. There's many touristic places. There's Barcelona, which is not the easiest place to implement waste collection. So it will be very interesting to see how they kind of mix together those challenges, how they reshape their municipal waste management system to fit with pay-as-you-throw.
Okay, thank you, Jean-Benoit. I was just considering from the audience here, if there is someone willing to contribute. I was especially looking at Luca from Italy, if you have some consideration, if you want, just because in Italy, as you know, and you are aware, we have now more than, I guess, 400 municipalities which introduced pay-as-you-throw. So, do you have any suggestions and considerations in this respect?
Yes, actually, as a provider of IT solution for waste detection, we are part of this growing business on pay-as-you-throw, especially in Italy. And what I really like, especially on your presentation, is the fact that data are one of the key factors to build up a good strategy and good scheme. So pay-as-you-throw is just only one application of the data you get from the devices, from the citizens, but there are many other applications that may be more effective than just charging, just billing according to the ending of the bill.
Good. Thank you for the information. Good. Geronimo?
So, two ways to improve environmental behavior by systems, citizen incentive. Okay? And I find quite interesting that with 14 integrate with solutions. That is very interesting. The question is, which one is more effective?
Good question.
It's a big question.
Yeah, and I would add something. Which one is more effective to do what? Yeah. Because as I said before, we want to increase separate collection, but we also want to increase recycling, so good quality of recyclables. And well, it's a mix of options as always. I would also point out that is also a matter of the starting point, for sure. As Jean-Benoit was saying, maybe it's not good to introduce pay-as-you-throw when you don't have separate collection already in place, you don't have proper tools for doing separation. But also a matter of cultural habits. Someone told me that below a certain latitude, you cannot talk about pay-as-you-throw. I don't believe it, but there is an element of certainty in this statement. For instance, as I said before, in Zurich, they do pay-as-you-throw, but this doesn't imply good participation. In other areas, there is pay-as-you-throw and it works well. It makes good improvements. So again, it's a matter of a combination of factors, and there is a lot to be prepared before. I would just add this thing. You have to do many things, like for instance, cleaning up the databases of the users in order to assure a proper identification of the user, prepare a good financial plan as a municipality in order to be prepared to adapt it to the pay-as-you-throw, because you can have variabilities, and so it's not so easy. But anyway, the flexibility of the scheme is quite wide, so you can adapt it. Any other consideration from the panelists or or Michael Sata? Okay,
well, I have more than a consideration, like 2 questions for the audience and also for the speakers that we are here, for everybody. One is about the waste tourism related to also to prevention, because you, Jean-Benoit, have showed different examples, case studies with different results regarding prevention. If in these studies you have, I guess that you have seen if there is some kind of waste tourism or not. If this is related to the new PAYT schemes that are appearing in Catalonia, that we call them a combination of pay-as-you-throw and paper participation, because it was in some of the first PAYT systems, it's easy because you have one isolated municipality with door-to-door collection and PAYT system, so it's really easy to hand you back and put them in another municipality. And so it's also a financial problem for the municipality, because they are losing a lot of revenues for like packaging, for bio-waste in the case of Catalonia, that is essential for the financial balance of all the scheme. So from the experience of Italy, from the experience of the case study that you studied in your study, what do you think about these new schemes of paper participation? What do you think that could be the evolution?
Well, okay. On waste tourism, it's difficult to get data, but as far as I've seen, it's not a big issue. Like it won't be 10 kilograms per inhabitant on a territory level. Usually, when there's a drop of waste generated, it might be because it goes out. It goes in a different waste system that is not monitored. Like I think for some example, maybe it goes in container parks where it's not in the same data set. Or it can be a drop linked with home composting. Many, like if you make people pay for garden waste, for example, they will stop use the system and you won't see those wastes. But at the end of the day, do you want to collect garden waste door to door, let's say? Maybe not. Then the impact of, like, I think we want the impact of positive system.
Yeah. It's something that it's a chain, no? What waste streams you pay for, which not. For example, if you are talking about prevention, also maybe something good to pay for, like packaging, for example. But then you have more, you push also to the citizens for more waste tourism.
We have less figure on actually bonus-based system actually. It's true that we've seen some systems that reward people from disposing packaging, but yeah, you can always question the consistency with prevention methods, of course. And but I don't really have any good documented overview of the impact of that. I think maybe one system that is a bit similar would be the deposit refund system, where like you give a small reward for that. It's not really a reward, but when you look at that, it works very well on capture rate. Like the territory is using that, there is really high capture rate. So I think it's always the same answer, the same unsatisfying answer. It's always a category of instrument, and then you have to really check how you actually do it and what kind of message you bring. But is it useful or not? I don't really know.
I have some considerations. In this respect, I have a consideration. There was a congress last week in Italy, and they were discussing about the fact of pay-as-you-throw not having a huge impact in more advanced stages because you have a limited amount of residual waste. So they proposed, and yeah, it's a common proposal, to include in the variable part not only residual waste, but also dry recyclables like paper, glass, and plastics. In other terms, make people pay not only for residual, but also for paper, glass, and plastics with a limited amount, which is the system in place in Ghent, here in Belgium, in other places. Or in all Germany. In Germany is all like this. You pay a little amount for bio-waste, you pay more for residual waste, but you still pay. In doing this, you stimulate a little bit of waste prevention also, because to save money, you have to generate less like packaging, because you are paying a little bit. In system in which you are rewarding people, like we have seen some examples, no? you have discounts if you generate more light packaging. This fosters generation of light packaging. This is quite a linear consequence to some extent, or at least less care for waste prevention. So it's always a combination. What I see that works better is system that use not only residual waste but also food waste like packaging or paper, but make people pay for those fractions. It is true that if you pay for residual waste, you have a simple option to save money. You separate. You take away waste from residual waste and you put it correctly in paper, glass, and plastics. If you want to save money from paper, glass, and plastics, if they are charged, what you have to do? Waste prevention, which is absolutely on the top of waste hierarchy, but it's quite more difficult than separate collection. I mean, we have to do waste prevention, but it's not so easy to save food waste and changing our habits completely in order to go for waste prevention using glass bottles instead of plastic water and tap water and so on. So it has to be done, but you have to take into consideration the real variability in users that you get. Probably you put in place something quite complicated, but in the end, the real variability in behaviors would be a little limited. So it's an open field for investigations and for experimentation. I don't see any other raising hands in attendees. So waiting for from you any final considerations. And by the way, the GreenWeek is full of other events. There is a high-level event organized by the European Commission in, beginning on tomorrow, is it? Or on Wednesday? The first day of the conference is Wednesday. No, that's tomorrow, yeah, already. Good. So, if any other question raises, we are ready to finalize to end our webinar, and it will be available on the YouTube channel of Ways for Think for offline review. So, thank you so much for the participation, and thank you to ACR Plus for hosting us. Thank you, everybody. We can close the webinar now.